actually would like a warmer acoustic than we have. You will find when we play it that it's full of very, very small sounds. So we're relying on the resonance of the instruments themselves to create an acoustic. We did consider using some electronic enhancement, but both time and practicality said, don't bother with it, don't go there. And actually, it's lovely simply to work with what we've got. was the string orchestra that accompanied me last night, and to these guys. I've actually had the privilege of playing with some of the world's great string quartet, and these guys are up there. They really are.
What I wanted to do was talk a little bit more about what we've heard, and I know many of you probably have a lot of questions about just the operating of the instrument, the technique involved, and things like that. So, there you go. I will ask you to use that, but not when you're playing, obviously. Or you could do like David, but
yeah.
So, just to give you a little bit of background, how I came to meet John, I think I mentioned it before Dave and John's duo recital. I ended up in graduate school at the Royal Scottish Conservatory of Music in Glasgow, and the head of brass, every trombone student has to have a second study, and primarily for trombonists that choice is sackbut. And I mentioned to the person, his name was Brian Allen, who was a tremendous educator at that school, that that wasn't a really marketable skill for me. Could I do like jazz piano or something like that? And he mentioned that John is also a specialist in new music, and so we chose that path as a second study. And one of the things that first of all, it opened my eyes to a whole genre of music that I had sort of, to be frank and honest, dismissed as kind of noise. But we got into so much of the techniques involved and the fundamental ideas, not just of operating the trombone, but of communicating the music. And it instilled a love for new music in me that I've held ever since, and I think I always will. And one of the ways that we could sort of talk about the approach of how to introduce people to that stuff. So from the technique standpoint, what John worked with me was through, as a vehicle, was his unaccompanied sonata for tenor trombone, which is a 3-movement work that's phenomenal, and it was basically started out as a set of studies, right? And then it just sort of morphed into a piece that incorporates all these skills.
Yes, yeah, well that's right. I was very lucky. I had a publisher, and the publisher wanted me to write a set of studies on contemporary techniques. And furthermore, he was offering to pay me, so I said yes, because that's the way the world works. But I set off doing this and just found it so boring. I was boring myself, so how could I possibly interest anybody else? And for me, music is made to be played, and we have lots of great etudes by wonderful composers like Brahms and Chopin. They ain't for staying in a practice room. They're for getting out there. So that particular piece that Chris is talking about started its life as me trying to take the techniques that I'd already embraced myself in working with some of the great masterworks of the second half of the 20th century, music by people like John Cage, like Berio, like Xenakis, like Stockhausen. So these very, very great composers who came from the post-war explosion of experimental music on both sides of the Atlantic. And I was very lucky to be very closely involved with all of those composers, actually. But the problem was that the musical language was getting so far away from anything that I had been taught myself. I bridged that gap. I simply happened to be interested. But working with colleagues, I might have told you this, Chris, but I used to run a group called the Taverners Trombones. It was a 5-trombone group, and we actually went for 16 years, and we did a lot of shows, and we commissioned and wrote ourselves a lot of music. And we got an album commission, and I programmed Vinko Globokar's Discourse 2, which is I don't know if anybody here knows the piece. It's an extraordinary piece. It's one of the greatest pieces ever written for a trombone ensemble. It's very difficult. It's also very difficult to comprehend through its notation, because Globokar, a great trombonist composer, is writing at the very edges of what one can do with the instrument, and he had to invent new notation to express that. And the notation itself was a huge barrier to people. I was working with 4 people that were my best friends and some of the best trombone players working in Britain at that time, and we programmed the album, and it got closer and closer, and there was just no way, with the pressure of work and family commitments and everything, that they could learn the piece. That they couldn't do it, but we were stuck
committed to it. So eventually I said, okay, I'll record all the parts. And I ended up recording all the parts myself. And that was quite a good learning experience for me, but it made me realise that bridging that gap between the technical possibilities and the expressive language being used was one of the big barriers to more trombone players getting into the more advanced music. And so that piece was my response to it. My musical response was very deliberately not the same. You couldn't confuse it with a piece by Berry or Stockhausen. That doesn't mean that I was in any sense rejecting those composers. It was that I set myself out to do something different. And to use the same techniques, but in a way which was more approachable. And so that's... and now I've written 6 of them, 6 sonatas, and there's another one on the way for soprano trombone, actually.
I really love that you know, all of the extended techniques in the piece serve the music. It's not... gimmick is not the right word, but it's not an effect for the sake of an effect. It's all in service to a music. It all communicates a musical idea, and I think those pieces are extremely effective. In fact, I believe we gave the U.S. premiere of the Alto Sonata here on this very stage, in this fine acoustic, with Craig Mulcahy of the National Symphony just a few years ago. And I encourage you, these are all available, they're published now by Warwick, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And I really encourage you to find a recording. John did a wonderful recording called Amaterasu, which has the tenor and the alto sonatas. You listen to them without the score, and your mind is kind of blown, like, how is he making these sounds? And then you see the part and the instructions on what to do, and it makes so much more sense. You know, and I will say that I remember the first few weeks of studying with you, the main things we worked on were evenness of tone in all registers of the instrument. So it was the foundation of strong fundamental playing, just like it is to play a beautiful Rachmaninoff song, is the same for this type of music. And it was that, again, had a tremendous impact on me on how I approach stuff. And everything from, you know, it can be confusing and daunting sometimes to see in a score blow air through instrument, and you may not know what to do, how to do it. You notice when John did some of this stuff, there was a lot more sort of shaping of the sound with his mouth and things like that. And that, you know, those are the things that I kind of wanted to explore today. I have to say before I forget, the circular breathing while glissandoing and turning the page at the same time was a feat of tremendous skill. So
it was merely a necessity, you know that. But if you've got to do something, then embrace it and use it, you know. So it's yes, in my contrabass trombone sonata, which Brant Atama plays astonishingly well, and he was amused at, because of course the contrabass has a very, very long slide. You know, there's a handle, there's a long slide, and it's heavy. And I don't know if anybody here is a fan of old silent movies. I love silent movies. Harold Lloyd, you know, of course Charlie Chaplin. And you know, they often had a chase on one of those bogies where there are 2 people pumping the bogey, you know. And I'd had to do this slide on the floor to turn the page on a number of occasions, even put it on the end of the foot and doing this, you know, that kind of thing. So with the contrabass trombone, of course, it's so huge, you could put the whole trombone on the floor and move up and down like one of those. And I'll just give you this. This is a tenor trombone, so it's maybe get the act. So if you reverse the mouthpiece, you can get quite a strong. You know, I was doing a lot of air through stuff in that piece, but it was very gentle generally, apart from a few slap songs. And if I reverse the mouthpiece, angle it, I can send a very, very clear ray of air over the mouth pipe. Like that. Now, I don't know if anybody likes steam trains. I do. Now, if you imagine that with a trombone, and you have it at that angle, and you get a guy like Brant with all his hair coming down here, you know, of course it's theatrical, but the point is, it's, I hope not just a cheap trick. It actually has an acoustic effect, which has also a cultural resonance, because actually everybody in the world knows what those atmospheric engines sound like, and most people, even kids, because of cartoons, also get the combination of the physical movement, and so you don't have to explain to anybody what's going on. And that word extended techniques is a terrible thing, because it immediately says difficult. Well, in actual fact, there's only one sort of technique. It's a technique. It's just and it's difficult until you know how to do it, rather than like riding a bike. So if you don't know how to circular breathe, that's difficult. Once you know how to circular breathe, it's easy. It actually really is easy. You know, if you never did a slap tongue, that's difficult. If you know how to do a slap tongue, well, you can do a slap tongue. So it's actually, generally speaking, it is usage that makes something difficult. So in actual fact, I and quite a few other folks out there are very interested in increasing or normalising, shall we say, normalising the palette of sound. Because for me, that's what all of these things are. I hate... these days I just don't do it. You know, I've got cupboards full of music that people send me. I'm not interested in music that is full of technique for technique's sake. But one of the problems we face as not just trombone players, but wind, brass and percussion players, this is our time. We are undergoing a second renaissance. We're in it. This is very exciting. What's happening is that after a very long gap, after the European Renaissance, when our instrument was very much a secondary thing and it almost died out, in the past 60 to 80 years, we have an absolute explosion of writing, and we are developing a new palette of colour, sound and technical possibilities. The point is to develop an idiomatic palette, a palette that works. It has to come out of the instrument. This happened with the violin family right back at the end of the 15th century, and with the school of Cremona, they were responding to virtuoso players making instruments that actually would serve the ideas, and it all came out of the instrument itself. Paganini, 2 centuries later, being the prime example. Now, we now we're surrounded here by fantastic players. I mean, I've been listening to people student age doing wonderful, wonderful stuff, and then just worshipping at the shrine of Elliot Mason the other night. You know? Good players are crawling out of the woodwork everywhere in the world. It's a fact. That's marvellous. The question then is, to what end do we turn this extraordinary technical facility we have? And here we are faced with a problem. Now, okay, I'm a composer. It was not the trombone that motivated me to compose. The trombone doesn't motivate me to compose. Ideas motivate me to compose. Issues, places, things. I don't write music about the trombone, personally. And generally speaking, pieces that are written to do that don't interest me very much. Music actually has to communicate. We have to admit that we have a vast amount of mediocrity. The level of mediocrity has steadily risen. Really. But it's still the case that a huge amount of what we study at college, what I teach at a couple of really good conservatoires, and most of the stuff we work out on is extremely useful for getting us to play the instrument better. But if you put your hand on your heart and say, if I was not a trombone player, would I play this piece of music? The answer keeps coming back to me, no. Would I pay to go and listen to it? Well, if I wanted to hear a trombone player, yes. If I was going to listen to some music, no. That, for me, at a certain point, was a real crisis. That was a crisis of, what the hell am I doing this for? You know? And it can go one or two ways. Either you get bitter and twisted and angry and say, well, I've just wasted my time learning this instrument. There's nothing worthwhile doing except just, hanging out and making a living out of it. Well, you can make a lot more money doing something else. And I figure nobody ever paid me enough not to enjoy myself. Right? As a musician, nobody ever paid me enough not to enjoy myself. If I'm not enjoying what I'm doing, I'm out of the door. And that was a decision I took a long time ago. And that was a weight off my back, because I've spent the last 40 plus years, and I genuinely mean this, doing things I love doing, with people I love being with, often in extraordinary circumstances, and somebody actually even pays me for it a lot of the time. This is an extraordinary, you know. My dad died in his early middle age, and he'd had to spend his life putting bolts in car bodies on a production line, waiting to retire. That hasn't happened to me. Thank you, Big G, you know. So but the point is, we need vehicles to give us something that enables us to be regarded as artists. Are we artists, or are we sewer workers, stopcock bottom scrapers? What is it we're actually doing? And a lot of the time, what we're doing is actually not very satisfying. Of course, everybody in this building today is here because we play this instrument that we love, and we get our rocks off on just that aspect of it. But that's a physical thing, and it's a competitive thing. We have to also realise that a lot of the music that's been written is written as a technical vehicle to show how clever you are, how good you are, you know. I was bound up in that, you know. How high, how fast can I play? How loud can I play? How quiet can I play? Can I do something that will astonish people? And they said, God, he can do that and I can't. Well, that interested me once. It doesn't interest me at all anymore, you know. What interests me is if people are moved or touched by something. And also, this is a very exceptional point. That, you know, this is abnormal. We don't play to rooms full of trombone players. We play to people. And those people have as Chris was saying in that talk about marketing, people have a very short attention span and a very short patience span. The vast majority of the population will turn off just like that, you know. Who was it, Ellington, who said there's only two sorts of music, good music and bad music? I'd put it another way. There's two sorts of music, interesting music and boring music. Or you could say there's music with integrity and music without integrity. There's a lot of music without integrity. It really is. A lot of it's out there getting performed in commercial shows and stuff, and you know, we play it and we know what it is. We know that it has very little real value, but it is a commercial product. Is there anything wrong with a commercial product? No, because there's an economy and we've got to make money. To get that straight, I'm not a snob, and I'm not an art fascist. But we do have the opportunity to explore our deeper conceptions and perceptions, and we do it through this thing, because that's what we're good at. Are the pieces which are simpler? Not enough. Not enough. I mean, I've been trying to do something about that in my own work, and there are other people who do. But it's one of the things that actually anybody in this room today, if you've got a chance to work with a composer, do it. Got a chance to work with an arranger, do it. Talk to that person. Explain how the thing works. Show them how it works. Excite them into writing something for us. And try and get them to write things for little children. You know? I mean, I work with little kids and I get them singing through the instrument, moving about and dancing and getting away from music stands. I love that. Because there's nothing worse than seeing a group of musicians who are so uptight and frustrated about actually getting there and performing that they've lost all joy in performing.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. The question from the audience about bass trombonists in particular, how they thrive and succeed in a career field that is so narrow. And Dave said, in typical Dave fashion, the career field is as wide as you make it. And I think the person sitting here to my left is an example of that in action, of finding composers and exploring work with dancers and actors and things like that. So to the question though, how do you, there's so much theatrical nature. Well, the piece that you did on the duo recital is a theater piece. There was some theatrical experiences in the piece that we just saw. How do you approach helping someone who is used to sitting in a practice room and working on Arbin page 126 and may not be very extroverted with regard to facial expressions and comfort level with that part of performing new music? How do you bring somebody out of their shell in that regard?
Well, that's another very good question, Chris. The first thing is that working on the ARB and in the practice room, of course, is vitally important because we have to continually struggle to master the instrument and be good at it, and I get pissed off with myself when I split a note just the same as I always did. I split plenty. I do plenty that I get out there and think, damn, I didn't do that right. But ultimately, I remember doing a performance on the radio, and I tipped a few over, and I went home mortified. And my wife had listened to it at home on the radio, and I said, "Oh, geez, did you hear what I did there?" She said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, I split those notes." Get over it. Who gives a shit? Did it spoil the music? I said, I don't know. She said, I enjoyed it. Okay. And that's a very important thing. Nobody's interested in our personal grief. We're in the entertainment business. We've actually got to make people enjoy what we're doing. What we have inside. Never give the game away if you just did something completely wrong. Never pull an expression that says I failed, because that makes everybody out there think you failed. So the thing about helping people perhaps to step outside to get outside their normal comfort or discomfort zone, everybody's different. Every single person is different. As a teacher, but also as a person working with fellow musicians in situations in which they are out of their comfort zone, and that happens a lot. Also, I work with actors and dancers who are dragged into the musical situation. It's just the same. You get out of the zone of your primary skill and you feel naked. So one of the things is to talk to that person and find out what their interests are outside of the immediate thing. Everybody's turned on by something, and if they're not, that's a big problem. If people are so obsessed with the trombone that that's all that's worrying them, they're in for a really hard time. Because music isn't written about the trombone. As I say, there's a whole world of politics, history, social issues, natural environment, impending ecological disaster, clothes textures, food, female and race, gender. Yeah, the world is full of things to be interested and genuinely moved and motivated by. And actually, music is part of that. Music is the non-verbal communicator par excellence that human beings have created. So the first thing is to find out how you can get a person to express their interests and their fears, and then to start to move the music around that. I don't know if you felt that when I was talking. We spent a lot of time talking about things that weren't trombone, right?
That's true, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but all the time we were talking about trombone. Because
and I also think that carries over to just a basic performance practice. There was a moment last night in your concerto when you looked at the cellist who was playing his cadenza and smiled broadly, and it was not a directive in the score, but it was part of that. I think what it taught me was better stage presence, whether it's playing the Oasen Sonata with a pianist or doing one of your unaccompanied sonatas or the Friedrich Hochberg Subidobi Suite where you've got to destroy a trombone on stage. Those are the things that I felt from the new music world that was a direct carryover to the more kind of traditional things that we do as trombonists that was extremely, extremely helpful.
Okay, so that's what I would call chatter-tonguing. I'm literally chatter-tonguing. So the chipmunk is a very good thing. Chip and Dale, cartoon. So it's a chipmunk thing. So what I'm doing is maintaining an embouchure in a particular register. In that case, I was aiming around about the C above middle C. And holding the embouchure steady, and everything is behind there, and I'm combining. In that case, I just did conventional double tonguing and then moving into a little double tonguing. You can do it with triple, you can do it with anything. So the point is simply to allow the embouchure to begin to vibrate. Absolutely no pressure. It doesn't work if you put any pressure on the chops at all. Absolutely no pressure. And you'll literally go... In fact, Who saw David and I play? Put your hands up if you saw David and I play. Okay, not so many people. So there was a piece actually by mine. We ran out of time in the gig. We didn't have time to do all the music. So we're rearranging the stage, and I said to David, "David, we haven't got time for all this music." And he said, "I know, man. What are we going to do?" And I said, "Do you want to play your music or my music?" "Let's play some of your music." "Okay, then we'll play some of your music. Which piece of yours do you want to play?" "Let's do the first one." Just as we picked the music up, I said, "How are your chops?" He said, "This is a dry room." "Yeah. Let's sing it." Now with David Taylor you can do that. Now if I'd been playing with any of you, what would you have thought if we practiced a piece and then your partner suddenly turns around and says, "You know, we're not going to play the trombone, let's sing it." Well, he just said, "Yeah, man." I love David. It's just great. So the point is we're doing a lot of that in that piece, because if we'd actually played the piece on the trombone, we would have chattertongued, so we just did it with our voices. And I don't want to play it on the trombone anymore. It was much more interesting when we sang it.
That technique in particular, I thought translated really well to the cross the strings collegial stuff that the strings were doing.
Yes.
So it was and that was one of the things I loved about this piece, is that was a brilliant way to integrate two very disparate instruments. Like you've mentioned this before, that bad pieces for trombone and string quartet, or trombone and strings in general, are pieces that try to get the instruments to do something they're not designed to do. But here's a piece that capitalizes on things that the trombone can do, if in an unconventional way, that lines up exactly with the way that the string instruments work.
Well, yes, and this guy's a very, very good composer. It's beautiful string writing. Absolutely beautiful string writing. It's all completely urbane to string technique. And yet, most string players look at it and they need an explanation as what to do to get into it. The explanation doesn't take very long. And if you get guys like this, say, right, then you just do it. So a lot of it's graphic. So you respond, instead of conventional notation, you actually effectively respond to picture lines, as it were. But the picture lines are on staves, so they make complete sense, because they have a general pitch sense. This is in handwriting. It's in his handwriting, which is very beautiful. You can't do this with a computer, or it's very hard. So the handwriting, you actually have density of ink. You have ink fading in and out. It depends how you work with the nib of the pen. He still writes his music with a beautiful, sort of cross-headed nib. You can't put that in a computer. We lost something. How many... there will be some composers in this room. I work with a lot of student composers. The two big score notation systems, Sibelius and Finale. The world is sort of divided, as with Mac and PC. So, there's the Finale users, the Sibelius users. They're both great programs, but they're also profoundly limited because they work on a linear time frame. Now you can try to fool it, try to hide it, but the reality is they are profoundly compromised by not being able to work out of time. And it's very interesting that those programs play composers. They have made a lot of composition dumbed down to fit to the available notation systems. And I really mean that. And you look at scores being written from the 1940s until the development of the easily available typesetting programs, the adventurousness, the flexibility, the imagination that a composer could pour into his music simply through his handwriting. I mean, anybody who is of a certain age and plays in a big band with those pads that were copied out by the guys who endlessly copied out arrangements and took that, what a joy that is when you get into a big band and you're looking at handwriting. This actually gives you so much, and I want to go back to it. I mean, I've got about 12 of my own pieces stacked up. My publisher wants them all put into computer. I say, no! No, I can't put them into the computer.
John will be hanging out for a little bit before, if you guys have any more questions, but I've really enjoyed having you here. I hope you found this information useful, and I hope you've enjoyed this tremendous artist performance. So let's thank John.